family wrote me out of their story for 7 years. Not a slow fade. An overnight erasure. One Tuesday in February, my mother called me from the driveway of my own apartment complex and told me not to bother coming home for Thanksgiving. Or Christmas, or ever. The reason? I refused to lie to a federal investigator on my father's behalf. What none of them knew, what I had been quietly, carefully building in the silence they forced on me, was that the morning they walked into my wellness spa to demand I hand over everything I owned, they were standing on ground that already belonged to me in ways they could not begin to imagine. My name is Sloane, and I am 32 years old. I own a luxury day spa called Reverie in the Midtown district of Atlanta. Before I go any further, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. And if you have ever had someone try to weaponize your success against you after spending years pretending you did not exist, hit like and subscribe. You will want to hear how this ends. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and Reverie was fully booked from open to close. We had a bridal party of 12 in the East Wing, a corporate wellness event in the treatment suites, and a wait list of walk-ins that my front desk coordinator, Bet, was managing with the patient precision of an air traffic controller. I was in my back office reviewing the quarterly vendor contracts when Bet knocked twice, fast, the way she only did when something was wrong. She opened the door before I could answer. Her face was professionally composed, but her eyes told a different story. "There are some people at the front desk asking for you," she said carefully. "They say they are your family." I set down my pen. I had not spoken to my parents or my brother in 7 years. Not a text, not an email, not a card on my birthday. 7 years of absolute silence so complete that I had genuinely stopped bracing for it to end. I had built my entire adult life inside that silence. I had built Reverie inside that silence. I took a slow breath, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked out to the lobby. The lobby of Reverie is designed to feel like the first exhale of a very long-held breath. Warm cream walls, natural stone floors, the scent of eucalyptus and white tea drifting through a subtle diffusion system we had custom-built into the HVAC. Soft lighting. Deliberate calm. I designed every square inch of it. My father was standing in the center of it like a man who had never learned to lower his voice indoors. He looked older than I remembered. Heavier in the jaw, but the posture was identical. Shoulders back, chin lifted at that particular angle that said he believed every room he entered had been waiting for him. My mother stood slightly behind him, which was also identical to how I remembered. My brother Knox was beside her, his wife Petra next to him, both of them wearing the tight, performative smiles of people who had been coached on the drive over. My father did not greet me. He looked around the lobby the way a building inspector looks at a structure he intends to condemn. "We need a private room," he said. "Family business." Several clients in the waiting area had already glanced up. Bet was watching me from behind the front desk with her hand hovering near the phone. I looked at my father's face, the entitlement radiating off him like heat off asphalt, and I made a decision, not the decision he expected. "Follow me," I said. I led them through the corridor, past the treatment wing, past the meditation alcove, to the private consultation suite at the back of the building. It was the room I used for high-value client intake meetings. Soundproofed. No windows facing the main floor. A round table, 5 chairs, a credenza with water and glasses. I used it because it was professional. I led them there because it was also a room where nothing that happened inside it could reach my clients or my staff. I closed the door. My father did not sit. He placed a leather portfolio on the table, unzipped it with the deliberateness of a man performing a ritual, and slid a document across the surface toward me. "This is a partnership agreement," he said. 30% equity in this business, transferred to your brother. That is all we are asking." I looked at the document without touching it. My brother cleared his throat. "Look," he started, his voice taking on the conciliatory tone he always used when he wanted something. "It is not personal. You have done well here, Sloane. Nobody is disputing that. But you did not build this alone. Dad's name opened doors for you in this city, his connections in the Chamber of Commerce, the introductions he made when you were starting out." "I had not asked for any introductions," I said, "and none were made." Knox looked at my father. My father smiled the way he smiled when he thought he was about to close something. Here is the situation, he said, tapping the edge of the portfolio. Your lease on this property comes up for renewal in 45 days. The landlord is a man named Clifford Beaumont. Clifford and I have been colleagues for 23 years. We serve on the same foundation board. I have already spoken to him about this. If you sign this agreement tonight, Clifford extends your lease at current rates, no issue. If you refuse, he paused, letting it land. Clifford declines to renew. And given the commercial demand in this district, I would not count on finding comparable square footage in time to avoid shutting down. My mother reached across the table and touched the back of my hand. Sweetheart, she said. We are not trying to hurt you. We want to be part of your life again. We want to be your family again. Knox and Petra are expecting a baby. Think about what it would mean for that child to grow up knowing their aunt. Think about what this could mean for all of us. I had spent a significant portion of my late 20s in therapy unpacking exactly this kind of sentence. The way my mother could take a threat and dress it in the language of longing. The way she could hold your hand while delivering the knife. I did not pull my hand away. I simply looked at her. You flew to Atlanta for this, I said. We drove, Knox said, as if that was the relevant detail. I looked at my father. I looked at the document on the table. And then I looked at Petra, who was the only one in the room who had not yet spoken, and whose eyes were doing something complicated. A kind of calculating assessment, the way someone looks when they are trying to figure out which way the wind is about to blow. I have been watching people for a long time. When you run a business that is entirely built on making strangers feel safe and cared for, you learn to read the room in about 4 seconds. And what I read in that room in that moment was this. My father was afraid. Not of me. He did not have the imagination for that yet. He was afraid of something else, something that had sent him to my door after 7 years with a partnership agreement and Clifford Beaumont's name in his mouth. Let me get you some water, I said. I will be right back. I walked out of the consultation suite, closed the door behind me, and stood in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds. Then I walked to my office, opened my laptop, and pulled up the commercial property records for the Reverie building and the surrounding block. I already knew what I would find. I had been monitoring this for months. I printed 2 pages, folded them, and slipped them into the inside pocket of my blazer. I stopped at the front desk on my way back. Bet, I said quietly. If anything feels off in the next 20 minutes, you have my full authorization to call security. She nodded once. That was all I needed. Back in the consultation suite, I poured water into each glass and sat down at the table for the first time. My father was checking his phone. My mother had straightened her posture. Knox was whispering something to Petra, who had stopped doing the calculating thing and was now just staring at the credenza. I folded my hands on the table. Tell me about Clifford, I said. My father looked up, pleasantly surprised. He loved being asked to talk about his connections. Clifford Beaumont, he said, with the satisfied exhale of someone producing a trump card, has been a fixture in Atlanta commercial real estate for over 3 decades. Self-made man, impeccable reputation. His portfolio covers most of the Midtown corridor between 10th and 14th. He owns this building and 6 others on the same block. He and I have collaborated on 3 separate nonprofit initiatives. The man returns my calls within the hour. I nodded slowly. Does he? I said. That is interesting. Something in my tone made Knox shift in his chair. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. I reached into my blazer pocket and unfolded the 2 printed pages. I smoothed them flat on the table in front of me. Because, according to the Fulton County property records I pulled 15 minutes ago, I said, this building and the 5 adjacent commercial parcels on this block were sold 8 weeks ago to a private holding company. The sale closed on September 9th. Clifford Beaumont no longer owns this property. He has no lease authority here. He cannot extend, decline, or modify any commercial agreement on these premises. The room went very quiet. My father reached forward and turned one of the pages toward him. I watched his eyes move across the text. I watched the exact moment he found the date of the sale. The color in his face did something interesting. Not a flush, but a draining. Like water going out of a sink. This has to be a clerical delay, he said. Property transfers take time to record. Clifford would have told me. Knox picked up the second page. He read faster than my father. His jaw tightened. Dad, he said quietly. My father waved a hand at him. Clifford and I spoke 2 weeks ago. He confirmed the leverage. He said, Knox set the page down and said nothing. He was doing the math. My mother looked back and forth between them, her hand pressed flat against the table. I leaned back in my chair and waited. There is a particular moment in every conversation like this. I have had a few of them over the years, and I recognized it, where the air changes, where the person across from you realizes the architecture of the entire situation is different from what they believed when they walked in. This was that moment. My father stared at the property record. Then he straightened, squared his shoulders, and attempted to rebuild. All right, he said. The property transferred. Fine. That does not change the underlying business case. Knox is your brother. He has professional experience in operations management. Bringing him in as a minority equity partner would. Who bought it, Knox said. He was not asking our father. He was asking me. I looked at my brother. A company called Meridian Property Group, I said. Registered LLC. It is a small portfolio, 7 properties right now, all in the Midtown and West Midtown corridors. They have been acquiring quietly over the past 14 months. Cash offers, fast closes, no mortgage contingencies. Petra spoke for the first time. Her voice was careful. Is that... She stopped. Are you saying you know who bought it? I am saying I know the company well, I said. My father looked at me. There was something new in his face now. Not the entitled assessment from earlier. Something more careful. More watchful. Sloane, he said. His voice had changed register. I reached back into my blazer and removed a small folded card. I set it on the table next to the property records. It was a business card, simple cream stock, clean type. It read, Meridian Property Group, LLC, Managing Member, Sloane Merritt. My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. 14 months ago, I said, I identified a window in this corridor. 14 months ago, I said, I identified a window in this corridor. 3 of the anchor properties were held by an estate going through probate. 2 others had over-leveraged ownership structures and were quietly looking for exits. I had spent the previous 2 years building capital, carefully, specifically, with this acquisition strategy in mind. I made my first offer 16 months ago. The Reverie building was the 4th property in the portfolio. I bought my own building 11 months ago, which is why you will find no renewal clause in the lease agreement I signed at the time, because I was negotiating with myself. Knox was very still. I continued. When Clifford Beaumont's block came available 8 weeks ago, I made an offer. He accepted within 72 hours. He was highly motivated to liquidate. The recording delay in the county database is standard. It typically runs 6 to 8 weeks. If you had looked at the actual deed rather than the online summary, you would have seen the sale had cleared escrow on September 9th. My father stared at me. I had seen that stare before. Not directed at me, but directed at other people. It was the stare he gave to contractors who brought him bad news, to employees who had made errors he considered inexcusable. The stare of a man recalibrating how much damage control was required. You own this building, he said. It was not a question. I own this building, he said. It was not a question. I own this building and 6 others, I said. I own the parking structure on the adjacent lot. I own the retail pad on the corner. I'm the landlord, Dad. I have been your landlord for almost a year. You came here tonight to have Clifford Beaumont threaten me with a lease termination, and Clifford Beaumont sold me the deed to this block 8 weeks ago. He looked at the business card on the table. My mother put her face in her hands. Knox stood up. He watched to the window. There was no window, just the cream-painted wall, and then turned around. He looked at Petra. She was looking at her phone, and I recognized the expression. She had just searched the LLC. It's registered, she said quietly. To her. Knox sat back down. What do you want? My father said. His voice was different now. Stripped of something. I want to tell you something I have been waiting 7 years to say, I answered. Then after that, you are going to pay for the water, and you are going to leave. He opened his mouth. You are going to let me finish, I said, and he did. I think because somewhere beneath all the performance he understood that the room had shifted completely and that the only way out was through. 7 years ago, I said, a federal investigator came to my apartment and asked me whether I had witnessed you sign documents that I knew you had not signed. The documents were dated on a day I could prove you were out of the country. I had the passport stamps. I had the hotel receipts. I had a photograph. You called me the night before that interview and told me to say I had not seen those documents. You told me it was a minor compliance issue, that it would blow over, that family protects family. My mother looked up. When I told you I would not lie for you, I said, you told me I was choosing a stranger's investigation over my own blood. 3 days later, Mom called and told me not to come home. Knox sent one text, that said I had made my choice. And then all three of you disappeared. The silence in the room was the particular kind that comes when the official version of a story is retired. I worked 2 jobs for 18 months, I continued. I had a studio apartment in Decatur, with a window unit that did not work and a mattress on the floor. I ate a lot of canned soup. I saved the equivalent of a rounding error in the accounts you were protecting, and I saved it dollar by dollar. I found a mentor through a small business program at the public library, a woman who had built and sold 2 commercial properties by the time she was 55. She taught me how to read a cap rate analysis. She taught me how to look for distressed assets. She spent 40 hours of her personal time on me because I showed up every single week for 2 years. Knox was looking at the table. You did not call when I opened Reverie, I said. You did not call when we made Atlanta Magazine's best of list in our 2nd year. You did not call on my 30th birthday or my 31st. You called. I looked at my father. When you needed something. The same way you always call when you need something. The same way you always call when you need something. My mother began to cry. Genuine tears this time. I could tell the difference now. Sloane, she said. I was so afraid of him. I did not know how to— You knew how to dial a phone, I said. It was not unkind. It was just true. You knew where I lived. You had my number for 3 of those 7 years before I finally changed it. You chose not to use it. I understand why. I am not asking you to have been someone other than who you are. But I need you to understand that the story where you were all just giving me space, that story is over. We are in a different story now. My father had not moved. Dad, I said. The investigation. How did it resolve? His jaw worked. Compliance penalty, he said finally. Administrative fine. No criminal referral. So you did not need my lie, I said. You asked me to compromise my integrity for a fine you paid out of petty cash. He said nothing. Here's what is going to happen, I said. You are going to pack up that partnership agreement and take it home. You are never going to present that document to me again or use anyone's name as leverage over my business again. Because there is no leverage. I am the leverage. Every threat you walked in here with tonight collapsed before you sat down. And you did not know it because you stopped paying attention to me 7 years ago and never started again. Knox looked up. As of the 1st of next month, I said, I will be reaching out to your company regarding your office lease. You are currently a tenant in the Sable Park building on Peachtree Industrial. I acquired that building 6 weeks ago as part of a distressed portfolio. Your lease is month to month. I wanted you to know before you received the official letter from my property management team. Knox closed his eyes. I am not raising your rent, I said. I want to be clear about that. I am not your father. I do not use property as a weapon. But I need you to understand the full picture of who you drove 4 hours to threaten tonight. Petra stood up quietly and touched Knox's shoulder. He opened his eyes. My father reached forward and picked up the business card. He looked at it for a long time. He turned it over. There was nothing on the back. He set it down. I never thought, he started. His voice had something in it I had not heard before. Something undefended. I know, I said. That is the whole problem. My mother was still crying. Not performing. Just sitting in the wreckage of the evening, crying the way people cry when they finally stop trying to manage the narrative and just feel the actual weight of what they did. I stood up. I went to the credenza and picked up the water glasses one at a time and set them on the small service tray. Business habit. There is a cafe 2 blocks south, I said. It is open until 10. If you need somewhere to sit before you drive back, I recommend it. I walked to the door and held it open. My father picked up his portfolio. He walked to the door and stopped in front of me. He was close enough that I could see the particular tired quality in his eyes that had not been there 7 years ago. The entitlement was still present. That does not dissolve in an hour. But something had moved behind it. I do not know how to do this differently, he said. It was the most honest sentence I had ever heard him say. I know, I said again. That is something you would have to decide to figure out. I cannot do it for you. He walked out. My mother followed, touching my arm as she passed, not grabbing, just a brief pressure, like a question she did not know how to ask yet. Knox stopped in the doorway and looked at me with an expression that was some combination of embarrassment and something older and more complicated. I'm sorry, he said. It was quiet and it was real. I nodded. I did not say it was fine because it was not fine. But I acknowledged it, which was the most honest thing I could offer him in that moment. Petra gave me a small, careful look as she passed. I recognized it now for what it was, not calculation, but assessment of a different kind. She had been watching to see what kind of person I actually was. I think she got her answer. I walked them to the front lobby. Bet watched from the desk with the contained alertness of someone who had been very ready to make a phone call. I gave her a small nod and she relaxed by about 30%. I stood at the glass door and watched them walk to their car in the parking lot. The parking lot I owned. The building behind me, mine. The 4 surrounding properties, mine. My father walked with the same posture, shoulders back, chin up. But something in the stride was different. Smaller. The walk of a man recalibrating the map of the world in real time. The car pulled out and turned south. The taillights disappeared. I stood there for another moment. The eucalyptus and white tea drifted through the lobby. Somewhere in the east wing I could hear the faint sound of the bridal party laughing. My spa was full of people who had come to be taken care of. People who had chosen to spend their Thursday evening in a place designed specifically to make them feel safe. I had built that. I turned back from the door and walked through the lobby toward the treatment wing. One of my estheticians was heading to the supply room and gave me a quick smile. A client I recognized from her monthly facials raised a hand from the waiting area. The familiar texture of the work settled back around me like a coat I had left on a hook. I went back to my office and sat down at my desk. I picked up my pen. I looked at the vendor contracts I had been reviewing before Bet knocked. I reread the last paragraph I had annotated and picked up where I had left off. I want to tell you the part that surprised me most. Looking back on that evening, it was not the moment my father read the property record. It was not the moment Knox said he was sorry. It was not even the strange quiet of my father's final sentence at the door. It was the moment right after their car pulled out of my parking lot, when I turned back to face my own lobby and felt nothing unfinished. No loose thread of grief or longing pulling at me. No phantom craving for something from them that they had never once been able to provide. 7 years earlier, when my mother called from my parking lot and told me not to come home, I sat on the floor of my studio apartment for a long time. I want to be honest about that. I was 25 years old, and the people who were supposed to be my origin had just formalized their rejection. There is no way to dress that up. It was devastating. It took me a long time to understand that their inability to show up for me was a story about them, not a verdict on my worth. The woman at the library who taught me cap rates. Her name was Dr. Aldridge, and she had been estranged from her own daughter for 11 years before they found their way back to each other. Told me once that the most dangerous thing a family can teach you is that love is conditional and punishment is the mechanism, because then you spend your whole life either performing for approval or waiting for the next withdrawal. She said the day she stopped trying to earn her daughter's forgiveness and started simply being honest was the day the relationship became real. I thought about that a lot in the months after I opened Reverie. I thought about it when I made my first property acquisition. I thought about it on the days when the work was brutal and I had no one from my original family to call. And I thought about it standing in my lobby, watching their taillights disappear, understanding that what I had built here, the business, the portfolio, the life, I had not built it to punish them. I had not built it in spite of them. I had built it because building it was the only honest response to the world as I found it at 25, standing in the snow with nothing but the will to not disappear. You do not have to earn the right to take up space. You do not have to justify your success to people who bet against you and then showed up at your door when the odds changed. And you do not have to open a door just because someone who hurt you is standing on the other side of it knocking. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is own the building and decide for yourself who gets in. If this story reached you today, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, and if you have ever had to rebuild yourself from a place someone else left you. Subscribe. There are more stories like this here. Your presence in this community means everything to me. I will see you in the next one. The thing nobody tells you about being cut off by your own family is that the silence does not stay quiet. It follows you into every room you build for yourself. It sits in the corner of every small victory. For years I carried the weight of my father's rejection like a second job. Not consciously, not always, but it was there. In the background of every decision I made about Reverie, about the acquisitions, about the life I was assembling piece by careful piece. What I understand now, sitting on the other side of that October evening, is that every action in this story produced an exact and proportional consequence. My father spent decades building a version of power that depended entirely on other people not knowing what he did not know. He operated on the assumption that information flowed toward him and away from people like me. That is not arrogance born from nothing. It is a practiced habit reinforced every time it worked. And for a long time, it worked. On his employees, on his colleagues, on my mother and on Knox, and for 25 years on me. But a habit is not a law, it is just a pattern that has not been interrupted yet. When I sat across from my father in that consultation suite and watched him read the property record, I was not watching a bad man get punished. I was watching the precise mechanical outcome of a decade of choices. He chose to build his influence on relationships he never bothered to maintain. He chose to use a connection, Clifford Beaumont, as a weapon without verifying that the weapon still existed. He chose to stop paying attention to me the moment I refused to be useful to him. Every one of those choices narrowed his options quietly over years until the night he needed them most and found he had none left. And my choices ran in the other direction, not because I was wiser or better or harder working in some absolute sense, but because the rejection forced a specific kind of clarity on me. When you lose the safety net of family approval, you stop making decisions based on what will please people and start making them based on what is actually true. That is not a comfortable way to live, but it produces a particular kind of intelligence, the kind that comes from reading a room without hoping for a certain outcome, from learning to look at a cap rate analysis without wishful thinking, from understanding that the only version of security that cannot be revoked is the one you built yourself. My mentor taught me that. Not in those words, but in the habit of her. She showed up every week with marked-up property reports and bad coffee and 40 years of hard-won knowledge, and she gave it to me for free, because someone had once done the same for her. That is not luck. That is a chain of human decency passing itself forward, and I intend to be a link in it for as long as I am able. Knox said he was sorry at the door. I want to be honest that I do not know yet what that leads to. Sorry is a beginning, not a resolution. But I heard it, and I am choosing to hold it carefully rather than dismiss it, because intelligence without decency is just strategy. And I did not survive 7 years of silence to become someone who cannot tell the difference. What I want you to take from Sloane's story, from my story, is not that success is the best revenge. It is that integrity over time compounds. Every honest choice you make in the dark when no one is watching and no one will applaud you for it, adds up to something. You may not see it for years. You may be eating canned soup in a studio apartment in Decatur wondering if any of it is worth it. It is worth it. Keep going.